right, well, I don't think we have time to waste, so we're just going to start now. It's a real honor to be here again. Thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for including me once again, and this is the 10th Strategic Dialogue, so I really feel honored, particularly to be here again, because I've been here on so many others, and this is really important, a decade of really great work. My name is Hussein Ibish. I am a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and my role here is to moderate a large panel. We have a limited time, big topics, and a tremendous lot of brain power on this stage. So I'm just going to introduce them, and we'll get going right away. I'm going to try to leave enough time to bring in ample comments and questions from the floor. So if we can manage that, we'll have done very well. I'm going from my immediate left, Professor Lina Khatib of SOAS, Dr. Brian Katulis, my friend and colleague from the Middle East Institute, Dr. Kilic Kanat from SETA in DC, who's my neighbor across the street. Then we have Dr. Bahgat Korany, who's from AUC, of course, and my other very good friend, Aziz Al-Ghashian, from the SEPAD program at Lancaster, and who's a fellow follower of Abraham Accord issues and Gulf Israel issues, along with me. And finally, the EPC's own Dr. Mohammad Al-Zghool at the very end. So let's get right into it. And I think I might, that's probably better. Yes, it is. All right. So let's begin with a general question for the whole group. And I'll ask Professor Khatib to begin, but if, you know, say what you want to say, but the quicker we go, the more time we'll have for everybody. So just, you know, a general admonition to, you know, be mindful of that. All right, so the biggest question about the Middle East in a changing region it strikes me that we couldn't really begin without acknowledging the sort of present moment of crisis. And the next panel is going to deal with the war in Gaza entirely. So we're not going to get into anything detailed about that. But it seems to me we would be blind to a really urgent question, which is what does this spasm of violence, not just in southern Israel and now in Gaza, but region-wide. I mean, increasing violence on the Israel-Lebanon border. You've got Americans engaging in Syria and to some extent in Iraq. You've got Houthis involved. It's a broader regional spasm. What does that say about what I think we could have agreed we would have confidently referred to on October 6th as a sustained period of de-escalation, and in some cases rapprochement, but at least de-escalation. Let's assume that we all think de-escalation is useful and healthy, and if it's really in dire trouble because of this spasm of unrest initiated by Hamas on October 7th, with the intention of overturning the apple cart, what can be done to kind of restore the equilibrium, if we assume that's what we want? So let's begin with Professor Khatib.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I think what happened on October 7 is an illustration of long-term conflicts that never really went away, but that the international community chose not to pay attention to, have brought us. The Israel-Palestine conflict did not actually die down. It's just that international fatigue is what prevailed. And in some ways, I guess, sadly, it had to come to this at some point because of this inattention. Linked to this is another kind of international inattention, mainly on the US side, which is Iran's regional role in the Middle East when it comes to destabilization. That has been another issue that has been going on for a long time and also selectively ignored mainly by Washington, and this has had an impact elsewhere amongst different actors in the international community, including in Europe, with a lot of focus on the nuclear deal and not enough focus on Iran's regional role in the Middle East. So for me, these two issues are interconnected, and they have served as the drivers behind what happened on October 7. The issue now is that to resolve the situation, it's not enough to just come up with a plan to de-escalate in the short term when it comes to Israel and Palestine, but work towards sustainable peace. And that, of course, means resurrecting the two-state solution and the peace process, but also crucially paying attention to the role of Iran, because this is a key concern for everyone. And maybe this could be a moment to pay attention to the role of groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran-backed groups in Syria and Iraq, and come up with a strategy in the West to really address these groups, because the role of Iran is manifested through them. Thank you.
Let me a quick follow-up on that. So, I mean, is the implication of what you're saying, and I want the other panelists maybe to think about this as well, that the underlying tensions that defined the era, the decade of conflict and confrontation that preceded this era of de-escalation that really begins with the Abraham Accords, you know, I would argue, as the first obvious manifestation of it, that the causes of domestic and regional instability really didn't go away. That it was just sort of exhaustion and overstretch, and which is very different than, let's say, a resolution of any of those tensions. Talk about that for a second, and then we'll keep going on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As you said, these issues have been happening for a long time. It's just that mainly U.S. foreign policy has chosen to look elsewhere, and this has contributed to actors in the region trying to come up with solutions in the meantime. And the de-escalation that we have seen is part of the pragmatism on part of actors in the Gulf region in particular, because they need to find ways to have some sort of stability in this region, and they can't keep waiting for Washington to change policy for them to have their own strategies, and this is what they've been doing. But there's no denying that for us to really move forward, we really need international cooperation, and the US matters in this matter more than anyone else.
Great. Okay, so this is an excellent start. I want to turn to Brian, and just to emphasize that I really don't want to focus on October 7. I was just using that as a benchmark. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you to EPC, and I want to thank Dr. Ibtisam in particular. More than a decade ago, I remember having a conversation with her where she had a dream. And your dream has come true here. And I think, Hussein, we can all say that we feel like we're at the forefront of policy recommendation here at this conference. What I would say about the current moment and your big question of whether the de-escalatory trends that we saw from 2020 to early 2023, whether they're washed away by this war, I would say the answer is no. Right. But a lot depends on what happens in the war and then what comes next. I think October 7th and the aftermath is a clarifying moment. And it came not at a coincidental time, at a time when there was a lot of discussion about an Israel-Saudi normalization. It came about 3 years after the Abraham Accords were celebrated on the White House lawn. And what we saw, and we saw in the actions, but then also the words of Hamas and its leaders, which if you look at the multiple media interviews it has conducted, including a recent one in the New York Times with Maria and Ben at the New York Times, where they're explicit. They essentially said, we want a state of permanent war with Israel. And that is not aligned with where I think the broader trends in the region were going. If you think at what had happened earlier in the year, the Iran-Saudi deal brokered by China in March. The discussions, which Aziz and I actually wrote, there was a series of essays about how to elevate the Palestinian question in a possible Israel-Saudi normalization accord. Also would add to it the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor that was announced at the G20. All of these seem so fantastical now, a month into this horrific conflict that has dehumanized people from across the board, Israelis, Palestinians, even in my own country where you see people deranged, in a sense, murdering a young Palestinian American boy or an elderly man who was killed at a protest, a Jewish man. All of this, I hope, serves as a wake-up call that the more dominant trends, the desire for regional integration towards more normalization, peace and prosperity, I hope that's remembered. And I hope that's remembered by not only people in this room, but also people in Washington, D.C., in the midst of this war. And I'm sure we'll get to the question of how do we get back to that phase. But I'll close in just saying at this, is that the Biden administration, and I look at U.S. policy quite a lot, has looked at this war and reacted and set certain goals. And it's very short-term crisis management. I think a key is to handle sort of this crisis management better than they have in the first few weeks, but then connect it back to the broader impulses of greater stability, greater investment, not less. And the inclination in the United States for years has been to decrease or pull back from the region. And I actually think greater diplomatic and political engagement that's more balanced is a key to actually helping further these trends towards de-escalation.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I got to say I agree with you. The answer is no so far. And Secretary Blinken received unwarranted mockery for having said, you know, just before the spasm that it hasn't been this quiet in this region for a decade. It was true. And to some extent, it's still true. Dr. Kilic, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks for EPC for this very timely discussion. I think there are two things. Number one is, I guess I agree with Brian about the continuation of this normalization process. However, there will also be, I think, a soul searching about redesigning this. And redesigning needs to include, I guess, multiple different tracks that will be at the same time. We have seen that diplomatic overtures may not be sufficient. They are necessary but not sufficient to handle this. There are two more significant dimensions of this. While the diplomatic overtures and meetings and summits are taking place, there should be also an emphasis or a parallel track to deal with the frozen conflicts. So in all of those frozen conflicts, the countries that engage in normalization are at one part or the other way, they are parties. But because of the frozen nature of those conflicts, we usually do not want to speak about them at this point. And it is extremely necessary. We have seen in Palestinian-Israeli issue, we may see it in Syria, we may see it in Yemen, we may see in multiple different regions that those conflicts need to be talked about in the coming period. And in these kind of frozen conflicts, we have dealt with conflict management and containing conflict too much, but maybe we started to thinking about how to transform these conflicts or try to resolve these conflicts. Because the diplomatic overtures all depend on containing and managing these conflicts, but we have seen the Israeli-Palestinian issue that this may not be very successful. And the third largest track of this should be a regional anchorage. I think that is extremely important. Before October 7th, there has been problems that it is still a problem today, including humanitarian disasters, including refugee crisis, including climate crisis. And we have been talking about the natural disasters that is taking place in Turkey this year, in Libya, the flood in Libya, the earthquake in Morocco. In all of these conflicts, there was discussion about a regional anchorage, a regional cooperation in disaster management. I think the soft part, considering that, especially after what happened in Gaza, Palestinians will be much more vulnerable for the climate crisis and the effects of the climate crisis, there should be a softer part of this, a discussion on a regional anchorage, maybe that will start with issues like conflict management, issues like disaster management, that will bring countries together. And in terms of crisis like this, it can play a role of safety valve in order to provide bigger regional crisis between countries.
Just before coming to your question, I want to congratulate the center on the 10th anniversary at a time when many centers in the Arab world not only don't achieve, but don't survive. So it is good to have the 10th anniversary. Congratulations to you and to your team. Coming to your question concerning de-escalation, I think the key is to reduce the gap between the two levels of the conflict, the Arab-Israeli and the Palestinian-Israeli. We have been kidding ourselves that progress as Arab-Israeli can solve the problem. At a time when at the core level, the Palestinian-Israeli has been regressing and getting worse with the work of the settlers in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas, by the way. So the key to de-escalation is really to come and focus on the core of the issue, the Palestinian issue. I want to go beyond that. We have a panel, next panel on Gaza, so I don't want to detail that.
Let's not get bogged down in it.
Yeah. I want to come and address two issues concerning the title of our panel, Changing the Region. And I see two main aspects that seem to be contradictory concerning the change in the region. One, what I call domestication of international relations in the different parts of the Middle East, especially the security issue, fragmentation of societies, and the increasing violence. Yemen, Syria, Libya, where we have two governments, and the Sudan, where I heard last night that 800 people have been killed in Darfur. So the higher degree of violence at the domestic level. That is big change since the Arab uprisings of 2010, 2011. The other element of change I see goes the other way, and that is the increasing presence of the Middle East in what I call shared fates. We had a panel on climate change just before this panel. We had COP27 and COP28. And I see that the center here has published a book on climate change, which if you are interested really in a comprehensive analysis, look at it. I haven't read it yet, and I hope it will come in English. It is only in Arabic now. But these are two contradictory changes I see in the region, and I hope we will go more and more toward sharing and facing common fates at the global level.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Hussein, and for everybody here. And I just want to thank the Emirates Policy Center for their hospitality, and particularly Dr. Ibtisam Al-Kitbi, who I very much admire. If you don't mind, Hussein, I want to take a step back. I mean, we're talking a lot about de-escalation. We've just mentioned about normalization.
Yeah.
And I think this really begs the question of who is narrating de-escalation and who is narrating the region. And quite frankly, I think something that's been pressing me for a long time is that, the narrative of the region, especially in major political capitals around the world, unfortunately, the main narrative is not us. We are not narrating our security concerns. We're not narrating our perspectives, or at least we are narrating, but it's not resonating. So I think this is the question that we really have to ask here, is that how can we get our Middle Eastern-centric narrative to gain traction? What's our understanding of de-escalation? What's our issues with de-escalations? Why do sometimes, people are calling for us to de-escalate when maybe we have a different path? Maybe, speaking of normalization, why are we
because I didn't get
speaking about normalization, but how others want normalization to ensue, and the dynamics of it? So I think the question of narrative is very important here, and I think that's one of the gaps that I think we have to work on here in the region, is really have this narrative infrastructure that since we want to be global players, and I think we do have the potential to have a global resonance, there needs to be that narrative infrastructure that allows us, enables us to really have to be voiced, to voice our opinion, but also to gain traction. And it's not necessarily just for the sake of talking or for the sake of narrating, but because I sense that there is a framing to the discussion that's not us. We're not framing what we want with normalization. We're not framing what we kind of want with the security interest. And therefore, I think the paradigms are being kind of shifted and being kind of produced elsewhere. And this is something that we have to work on. And I think it speaks to this idea of paradigm of de-escalation. I think as a Saudi researcher of Saudi foreign policy towards Israel and focusing particularly on the regional element of normalization. And, I see two paradigms being at stake here, or in front of us, between the paradigms of the traditional paradigm of the Arab Peace Initiative, of this traditional land for peace kind of initiative. And then you have the peace for peace initiative, or peace for peace, paradigm. And I think going along with really the theme of today, old politics, new age, we have to start thinking about new paradigms of peace and de-escalation out of addressing this issue that right now, the Palestinian-Israeli issue is one of a regional one. It's no longer confined to just a Palestinian issue and an Israeli issue, and then we could stay from the back. I think now it's time to start interacting more explicitly into this in order to change the paradigm, to challenge the previous paradigms that, quite frankly, has failed.
Okay.
I mean, in my opinion, I think we're flogging a dead horse when it comes to the regional paradigms of before. And now, I think it's time to reflect, to look, and not just completely cancel out anything, but to really reflect on the previous paradigms. I think, when we look at the legacy of the Arab Peace Initiative, we get to see, for example, the land for peace kind of transaction. There is the transactionality of the Abraham Accords that can be used. And I think it's time now to really address this issue, and more importantly, narrate what we want of normalization.
So that's a perfect jumping off point to the next question.
Yes.
Which is to Dr. Mohammad, which has to do with regional sort of arrangements, and is to preserve what may be being destabilized. Is there the potential for new regional security arrangements, and even maybe a new regional security organization? And if so, who would be involved? And then I kind of want to bring everybody else back into that question, but I'm just going to begin with you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibish. I will break the rule here. I will talk in Arabic, so I am sorry for the confusion.
Actually, the Middle East being associated with fragility is nothing new. The Middle East has been fragile in terms of security for many decades. This begs the question to separate two tracks of fragility, a deep path of fragility, which is historical and cultural and structural, one that needs to be addressed in another domain other than our forum today and our debate today. We have another track actually that has to do with pragmatic steps that we can address by putting forward a number of clear recommendations to reduce this level of fragility. In this region, we have certain hot points and flash points, and also we have countries that have their own expectations and developmental aspirations and seek to achieve a better future. However, these countries and areas of our region that have high economic expectations are definitely under the threat of these crises that expand regionally and pose a threat to these expectations of rising countries in the region. So the key factors of fragility that we can talk about in terms of regional security have to do with two main issues, which are mostly associated with two key causes: the Palestinian cause and the Iranian issue. Since I'm an expert in Iranian issue, I will not talk about the Palestinian cause. I will lay it aside for now, and I will speak about the main elements that lead to the fragility of the region, which are based on the Iranian issue. These are elements that feed into one another. They are not separated, of course. We have seen how Israel did its best to undermine the nuclear deal, which could have caused a bit more stability in the region. And Iran also did its best to undermine the Abrahamic Accords, which may have caused some stability in the region. So we see opposing efforts by each party to undermine all tracks of stability and de-escalation, and we need a new vision. We have three major issues, in my own perspective, based on the Iranian issue. The first of which have to do with the practice of policies in the non-state actors. Those are the main approaches adopted by the Iranian regime for several decades. This has made the region exposed to flagrant crises and made the political players in the region quite perplexed of how to deal with non-state actors. How do they deal with those non-state actors who are not playing by the rules of states? And we also have another major issue that has become manifested recently. There is hegemony of non-state actors in some geographical areas of this region, in the sense that they surpass in their capacity and capabilities more than some other regional countries. And another critical indicator is that some major regional and international powers want to force their own agenda through some non-state actors. We have seen some indications in the recent developments that there are major international powers that would like to enforce their own projects and agenda by utilizing non-state actors. This will put the future of regular states in a great peril. Another issue has to do with Iran, the militarization of economies. Last year we celebrated the fact that the region was transforming from geopolitical confrontation to geo-economic competition, in the sense that we will find more positive experiences, such as the Saudi model or the Turkish model that we have seen. That is, it is focusing more on the economic aspects of the region and boosted stability. But we were surprised that some regional parties have once again started implementing the old school policies in the new age. So some parties are trying to militarize the economy, in the sense that they use military means in boosting and achieving the economic agenda. We have seen how Iran amassed Zanzor economic corridor in Azerbaijan from materializing on the ground, and also the Iranian efforts in Iraq to prevent the Turkish pipeline from materializing, and also the latest events in Gaza. We have seen how this will undermine the Indo-European economic corridor. This definitely something has to do with Iran as well. So if we continue to use the same old tools in a new competition, in the new competition we should implement new tools because it is fundamentally different. It is an economic competition and not a military one. This is another element. And the final element I would like to conclude with, as Dr. Lina pointed out, talking about the international attention, but actually we are in a region which needs neutrality. We are in a region which needs more international neutrality because now the region is at the threshold, not international competition, but international war and international conflict in the Middle East. I'm afraid that after some time we may find ourselves as if the countries of the region turn into proxies to warring international powers in our region. We need a new model of positive neutrality that has a positive impact by the superpowers, which should acknowledge the importance and significance of the Middle East and how important it is for its economy and for the global energy security as well. So, international superpowers should actually avoid turning the Middle East into an area for settling scores and war and conflicts. Thank you very much.
It really is so complicated. And what kind of regional arrangements and regional policies are necessary for preserving this stability in face of challenges that appear to be the return of the repressed?
Okay. We used to...
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah, it's on now.
There we go.
We used to get a lot of criticism in this region, from the region as well as outside, for not having a unified Arab stance on X topic.
Yeah.
Talking about Arab weakness, lack of Arab unity. I think this is completely misguided, actually, because there need not be alignment across the region on every single issue. We live in a world where pragmatism and transactionalism rule, and we can transform this into a strength, because all the different ways in which different countries in the region protect their own interests and pursue their own interests can be utilized as tools, diplomatic tools. What we need is not alignment on every issue across the region, but what we need is on topics such as the one we're dealing with right now with Gaza and Israel, is to look in this divergence for coordination amongst the different regional actors in the Arab world and use these different tools together. So we don't all need to pursue the same line, but we can coordinate on certain issues.
Yeah.
And I think this would be much more powerful. The other issue I would say is it's high time for me, and this is a proposal while I'm here having this platform, it's high time for the UN Security Council to have permanent membership from this region.
Yeah.
So
No
these
doubt.
are my 2 cents.
Pretty good. Brian, and how do you think the U.S. would feel about this?
Sure. So first, I have a very practical suggestion. We should make our 6-person panel a 9-person panel next year. And I would include 3 voices that are absent talking about the region right now. And that would be a Palestinian voice, an Israeli voice, and a voice from Iran. Because I think what we're all talking about, and that may sound fantastical to you, but these discussions happen in any case. My colleague Randa Slim will be on the next panel, runs a terrific Track 2 program. And the work that think tanks do aren't just policy papers, but also trying to build connections and conversations between folks. So I think widening the circle and including more Palestinian voices especially, but having Israelis, and then clearly Iran is a key part of the problem, but perhaps part of the solution. 2 things I'd say, I mean, on the specific proposal, UN Security Council reform is always sort of a perennial debated
you don't
discussion.
Have to respond to that.
But I do think it's important that on 2 key issues, US regional cooperation, and I do worry that at this current moment, we may be in a similar moment or heading towards a moment that sounds or feels a little like the 2003 Iraq War, or that very bumpy period between 2011, the Arab uprisings, and the Iran JCPOA, where there was a widening trust and confidence gap between the United States and the region. I think we need to have more of a discourse on 2 key issues. One is Iran, and not simply just on the nuclear program, which had dominated the discussion, but on its regional actions, as well as what it's doing in places like the Ukraine war with drone warfare. And the US policy, as far as I can tell, has not really been clarified in any way since the collapse of the effort to rejoin the JCPOA. And then secondly, the elevation of the Palestinian question in a diplomatic and a serious diplomatic and political format where the United States, with partners in the region, talk not just about the ceasefire, which is urgent, but talk about a longer-term joint plan on how to elevate this. For the U.S. to be able to do this, we need to change a lot of what we've done for decades on the Palestinian question, which is downgrade it, treat it just simply as a subset of the U.S.-Israel relationship. If we want to get serious about it, we actually need to have that conversation sooner rather than later.
That if is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
What's that?
The if is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Dr. Kilic, what about regional structures? What about regional players, including Turkey?
Before that, can I add one thing about the UN system and the...
Very briefly.
I think there is one positive thing that for the last 3-4 years, starting from the COVID-19 crisis, then Ukraine, and then in Gaza crisis, UN reform, the discussion about UN reform has been now more of a public issue. Before that, it was an elite exercise, policy level discussion from just some countries from global south. Now we have seen at the very public level that there is a search for better global governance, and there is a search for a more effective and inclusive UN system that can resolve these issues when it is necessary. So I think this is the positive part of it. In terms of regional framework, I think what my friend Abdullah said about normalization is extremely important, and it should, I think, we have to be careful that it shouldn't lead to regional normalizations, or de-escalation shouldn't lead to new alliances or alignments. Because of that, regional framework is extremely important. And the second thing is about this discussion that just Lina mentioned about the transactionalism. And that has been tried multiple different times, compartmentalization or transactionalism, and trying to deal with issue by ignoring the others so that it will not expect us, that it will not come and haunt us. And each and every time it turns out to be not very successful. I guess we may need to have a two-track approach here. We need to have transactionalism to establish these connectivity among the countries and the public, and establish a working relationship at the beginning. But at the second level, we need to have a more holistic approach to deal with the current crisis. At first, maybe in a more backroom diplomacy, etc., and then deal with these issues. And regarding the superpower rivalry entering to the region, I think we have seen in the last couple of the conflicts...
I was going to come to that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So that's next. But Dr. Korany, I wanted to ask you specifically about Sudan, because you mentioned Sudan in your last answer. What about the potential for regional structures and regional security arrangements that could contribute to containing or even calming a situation such as the ones, in plural, that have been developing in Sudan? Because there's more than one in that country at the same time.
I mentioned Sudan as an example of what I call domestication of security. And if actually I can focus on the action needed, just taking the title of our conference, obviously we need new policies for new problems. These new policies would just take into consideration changing paradigms, the changing mindset. And in this respect, I would like very much to not to think of geoeconomics and geopolitics as alternatives, as substitutes, but as aligned. Work on both levels at the same time to really bring the change bottom up. This is what we need.
Okay, I'd like to shift, thank you. I'd like to shift the question a little bit as I go to Aziz. Unless you have really pressing thoughts about regional security arrangements, in which case, go ahead. But if you don't, I think we need to turn quickly to the final set of issues, which is what about the relationship between regional actors, whether they're operating individually, bilaterally, or in multilateral forms, and the global realities. So whether it's the US-China rivalries, or the increasing participation of regional actors here as international actors, the BRICS memberships and what have you, and the emergence of countries like the UAE as significant players on the international stage. So this is a set of issues I'd like to throw out. I want to begin with you, go around once quickly, and then bring in the audience.
Sure. So just one quick thing that I'd like to mention about just carrying on from this discussion. And I think, a way of addressing the regional or having some sort of regional framework is that I think we need to focus a lot harder on trying to make a regional lens and work together, at least on creating and coalescing around and agreeing on what a regional lens could be. And I think just to go back to what King Abdullah of Jordan said once in a TV interview, and he said, well, now we're in a region where if one state is in trouble, that means it's not just their problem only, it's everyone else's problem as well in the region. So I think, and this actually facilitates discussion, as what Lina said, is that we don't have to agree on everything, but at least we could agree on the regionalization of these problems and the regionalizations of the incentives to solve these problems. So this is the issue that I think would I would say about the discussion.
That's a good contribution.
Yeah, I hope so.
So I want to ask everybody just to speed up because we're running short on time, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, and just about the circumnavigation of this multipolarity, I would say about that we say in the region, if I get your question right.
The question is the relationship between regional players, whether individually or in groups, and the global stage.
Okay.
That's the question. So
yes.
US-China, with a hyphen, and the emergence of countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia and others, Iran as BRICS, and as significant actors in their own right.
Yeah,
That's the question.
Well, in my estimation, I think the principle is the same.
Yes, it is.
That this just continued from a regional aspect into an international sphere, and basically having that principle of what we heard, I think, of non-alignment, treating our policies in a particular way that's not very binary. And I think this is, again, it goes back to the issue that I kind of alluded to in the beginning of frames, and that we're operating in international frames.
Right.
But this is the time now to really induce and enter into the global stage with our own frame and our own understandings, and to say that, listen, me working with China isn't really working against you, the United States.
Yeah.
And me working in somewhere else isn't really about negating what BRICS is. So, but this has to come with a very particular effort of really communicating this.
Yeah.
And I think this is really where the struggle is. This is where I think we have to really work hard in trying to communicate this, because the policies are sound.
It's a public diplomacy challenge more than anything else.
Exactly,
right.
Yes.
That's great. I hate to hurry this up, but I'd like everybody to kind of give at most 2 minutes so we can bring in the audience. Dr. Mohammad, I want you to address this question of the region on the global stage.
يعني إذا سمحت لي سأشير إلى ما ذكره.
I would like to refer to the American role and Russian-Iranian collaboration, and then I will talk about a suggestion in order to solve these problems. Regarding the Russian-Iranian collaboration, which is concerning, and especially at the military level, usually any collaboration between two countries should not be of concern to others, as far as this
cooperation is on some conditions that are normal. But from the Western perspective and from the perspective of the Middle East, this collaboration is destabilizing the region. And from the Middle Eastern perspective, this is the case for two reasons. First, in the internal game of Iran, this enhances the role of the Revolutionary Guard and enhances the influence of Iran in the region and enables them to acquire more military capabilities and also gives them more legitimacy to what they are doing in the region. The other side, and it is related to this point, is that there is pulling of Russia to the region, to the game in the region. So Iran, by doing so, and by this collaboration with Russia, is trying to pull Russia gradually to this region, and Russia became part of the game, and this is very dangerous. And I will let that aside, and let me talk about what we haven't done enough in the region, in the Gulf in particular, which led to the continuity of this fragility. I do believe that we in the Middle East, we prevent always to have collective solutions. We look for individual approaches, bilateral approaches, and these axis approaches. We create axes, but we prevent the collective solution and the joint solution, the table that is gathering everyone so that everyone has some interest in this collective solution, which makes them enabled to turn things upside down. Iran turned things upside down because it didn't have interest in that, and it could influence negatively the rapprochement between Europe and India and the Arabs, because this axis in the perspective of Iran is not satisfactory. So there have been losers, and of course we are talking about different actors like India, Turkey, China, etc. So we have to exercise in the Middle East to have gathering tables, collective solutions, institutionalizing the regional solutions collectively. And we have to build the trust more, because the current situation is that each side looks suspicious about any round table in which there is no presence for that side, and there is this attempt to abort and foil those gatherings. This is applying to Iran, to Israel, because Iran doesn't want the normalization between Israel and Arab countries. Israel doesn't want any nuclear agreement between Iran and US. I think that there should be a table that is satisfying the interests of all the parties, and Israel looks to Iran as an existential threat and vice versa. There should be some mutual guarantees so that no side looks at the other as an existential threat. And as far as this threat is permanent, we cannot expect from the other side to remain silent. I think that we need such collective tables, and for the Gulf countries, they have ambitious economies, and they are interested to create these tables, and they have to do it because they have the potentials economically. Thank you.
Great. So we're running short on time. I do want to bring in the audience in a minute. But I have 4 more people who I want to step in on this issue of the region and the globe. So if we all restrict ourselves to about 2 minutes or less, then we will be in good shape. So, Professor Khatib, let's begin with you.
Thanks. It's high time for the globe to take this region seriously, more than it's already doing. It's not enough. I know we've had a lot of progress, but I think it's high time for this region to be seen for the assertiveness that it already has, the agency that it already has. I think the focus on weaknesses and criticisms can perhaps mask the huge transformation that we've seen in this part of the world over the last few years. It's been transformation on fast forward. And I think this is a pivotal change. We're seeing strengthening of diplomatic infrastructures in countries, especially in the Gulf. We're seeing, a new Middle East emerge here, and yet the frameworks that are often used to engage with this region internationally remain quite archaic. And so we need a change their end.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I think all of the impulses that I think inform things like the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor of linkage are the things that need to be reinforced, because I think it responds to the human security needs, especially in those countries, the have-nots of the region. What I would say, and I wanted to add one more thing about this idea of the UN reform, and in this context, it's important. This comes after 10 years of essentially the United Nations being impotent in the face of hundreds of thousands of Syrians, innocent Syrians being murdered by their own government. And I know that's an awkward point to raise at this moment, at a time when there's questions of Ukraine and Gaza, but it's still there. And that international system was blocked because of the inaction of Russia and China. And that's one of the things that complicates this question of, okay, can the region move forward when so many issues are just swept under the rug, including most recently one of the deadliest civil wars the Middle East has ever seen?
Yeah. Dr. Kilic?
Just a quick addition what Brian said. I think about the superpowers, there is now soul searching among them. Two different editions of Jack Sullivan's article was one example of it. 13 years ago, Hillary Clinton wrote an article, and Kurt Campbell was his deputy, discussing that United States deal too much in the Middle East. Now the focus should be in Asia. And after 13 years, a protege of Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan, who and Kurt Campbell just nominated to a senior position at the State Department, just before October 7 was discussing that now the focus should be Asia. Because of that, there was one single paragraph on the Arab-Israeli conflict and things like that. So there should be a soul searching to understand Middle East, that there may be misreading Middle East every 10 years in US administration. And second thing, in regards to China, 4 months, 5 months ago, when we are having a discussion with the Middle East experts in regards to Chinese mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, there was a optimism among some that with the arrival of a new superpower with a new perspective. But the Gaza crisis demonstrated that that superpower may also underestimate the complexity of the issues here and the need for a more intense diplomacy. So those kind of diplomatic overtures may not be sufficient. While superpowers are continuing to read the region, misread the region, I think there should be more emphasis and more attention by the regional powers and regional countries to solve the problems of the region among themselves.
Okay, and you're going to be the last speaker right before we go to questions or comments from the audience, so make the most of it.
Okay. Dominated now by the regional dimension. But that shouldn't make us forget the basic issue. And my idea is that things are not only top-down, but especially bottom-up. If we want to be effective about facing the problems, we have to adopt that level. Just to quote the inaugural speech, prosperity and stability are not substitutes. They can't be either or. They have to be aligned. And I think the measure of our success is how we can combine both at all levels, regional and national.
All right, very good. Now we're going to go to questions and comments from the floor. You've been very patient, thank you. We've had a lot of great comments here. So we're going to begin with Nasser Laun, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to all the panelists for their interesting and honest remarks. I guess my question is for Brian, and I appreciate your honesty about the U.S. position and the U.S. role and what you described was a short-term crisis management. I guess my question is to you is, what are the chances for a US role in a more permanent de-escalation in light of perhaps the irreparable damage that has been caused to US credibility from the conflict? There seems to be this impression that the US can just come back, 6 months into this after letting things die down and then just pick up where they left off. And I question that. Thank you.
Great question. Look, we're 5 weeks into a conflict that is already bloodier than the second intifada for the Israelis, it seems, and then bloodier than all of the previous wars in Gaza combined since 2005. And the Biden administration, I think, set out, I've written about this, but 3 main goals. One was supporting Israel's right of self-defense and to eliminate a threat from Hamas. Second was to prevent a regional war. And third were a set of issues related to humanitarian access, the Palestinian questions, and also the Arab world. So those 3 buckets of issues. And I think 5 weeks in, it so clearly has still fallen short from all of that. What's interesting at this moment is that most of America's Arab partners, and you just saw the summit in Riyadh again, reiterate a similar position that sounds quite familiar to some Americans, those who are paying attention to the protests calling for a ceasefire. And I don't think there's a simple remedy. I think a key tension that the Biden administration faces is between the 3 main goals of how do you navigate this, because if you continue to back without question Israel's right of self-defense without limit, it then could escalate the regional scenario and actually make the humanitarian situation worse. But at this moment, I think one key thing, and it's something we've talked about in this panel, is the need for the US to actually assume a much more humble approach that actually builds partnerships across the region. And that, again, isn't meant to try to isolate or pressure, it's to plan for the future. That the way that this war is prosecuted in the first 5 weeks has created a lot of doubt about what's the next plan. Yeah. And there's big questions about what, and I'll close here, where the Biden administration says one thing, we'd like to see the PA or some other scenario, and then our partner in Israel seems to have some other plan, but it's not clear what it is. Yeah. What I'm suggesting, Hussein, is that I think the US, a key part of this, which is missing, and I know Brett McGurk's coming out here again this week, but there needs to be much more of an emphasis to work with partners in the region to talk about not just the ceasefire, but then what's next and what comes after this. Right. And that coordination, I think, is desired here in the region as well.
Okay, but this is really not unprecedented. I mean, people who think it's unprecedented amount of tension and anger have a short memory, because it's not. But let's go to the next questioner. We've got Hassan Al-Qasmi. You're up. Oh, Hamad Al-Qasmi, excuse me. Sorry, Audi Aberdeen is next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a small comment. If you want stability in the Middle East, history has shown you need decisive US leadership. We have seen it with Carter, we have seen it with Bush Sr., and we have seen it with Nixon. These are the 3 administrations that brought peace. This administration at the moment, I'll tell you, when they came to power, I was told by someone who's close to them, we will shove the Palestinian issue to the side. And I said to the person, this is a delusion. It's going to come back and haunt you. So until we have an administration similar to Carter, that has a Scowcroft, that has a Brzezinski, that has a Baker, we're really going around and around, and we're not going to go anywhere.
Well, thank you. So basically what you're saying in the context of this panel is a strong U.S. role is still essential, absolutely essential. So I really appreciate that. And now we've got Hamad Al-Qasmi, who I put forward one step early, but floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
حمد القاسمي من الأكاديمية الخليجية.
Hamad Al-Qasimi from the Academy. My question is to Mohammad Zghool. You talked about the geopolitical rivalry, and what caught my attention is the militarization of the economy. Does it mean that we are about to see the military kinship, and that this will emerge broadly? And if this is the case, what are the repercussions that will be impactful? Thank you.
Okay. I would invite any of our panelists who wish to comment on that to do so, and that's
it's for
Al-Zghool,
Hussein. It's for Al-Zghool.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. We'll begin with you, and then anyone else who wants to comment on it, and that's going to be the end of our panel.
شكرا.
Yeah.
شكرا جزيلا على يعني طرح السؤال المهم.
Thank you very much for asking this important question. The militarization of the economy is very clear to everyone, and this is by Iran. It did that in the Caucasus, in Iraq, and recently in the Middle East. And this is through this fast procedure of undermining this initiative of the corridor between Europe, India, and the Middle East. Inside Iran, the economy of Iran remained all the time standby. And for decades, the economy of Iran is not in a good shape and has not been so. The economy of Iran has always been standby for a military confrontation. This created elites, networks, and circles of interest that are benefiting from the situation and the crisis in Iran, and they want to gain advantage of it because those elements built themselves stronger through nurturing on those crises and situations. Now, how this is affecting the foreign policy of Iran? The foreign policy of Iran makes the economy a second priority. All the collaboration initiatives that have been offered by Iran to the region in the recent years make the military and security collaboration at the first level, and the normal economic collaboration is not among the priorities of Iran. So, consequently, it is normal that Iran uses its proxies, which are many in the region, in order to turn the table when it sees that there is any opportunity and potential for more regional collaboration. So Iran needs to help itself to turn into a normal state, and this should happen through an institutional approach. I think that the COP28 can be another platform that should encourage Iran to act institutionally as a normal state and collaborate with the region and the world. So let's think honestly about a Secretariat General for the climate, for instance, in the UAE, and Iran is a member of it, and Israel as well, and all the Middle Eastern countries are members, because the climate is also threatening Iran as a state, and climate change is threatening us also. I think that this can be a starting point for regional collaboration and for initiatives that can be regional and will serve all the parties with economic tools and not military ones. Thank you very much.
Source of instability in the region. So if anybody else has a closing thought on this topic, that's great. If not, I'm going to ask the audience and join me in thanking our panel. Excellent job. And thanks again to Dr. Ibtisam for including all of us today. Thank you very much indeed.